That brings me to the story of this sustainable life. How did it come to be? Really, to go back the context, it's the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution, besides the steam engine, it brought us certain values that are major values that this country lives by. Growth, especially GDP growth, population growth, efficiency, externalizing costs. If we can dump something out the back, well, historically we've done that. We value comfort and convenience. That's what the steam engines are for. And that's what our market, a lot of it is about. As a result of the Industrial Revolution, the material quality of life improved a lot. And there's a little waste. Historically, there was a lot of quality of life improvement and a bit of waste, but the waste wasn't so bad because the earth is big, and if any place got polluted, we could always move to some other place. But over the years, these things reversed, that now the waste is a much bigger issue. The quality of life is not particularly improving much compared to before. There are improvements, of course, but not nearly like it was before. And one example of this is that we have so much material stuff that this is, for the first time in 2 centuries, the current generation of children in America may have shorter lifespans than their parents. That's what's happened. As for me personally, you may know I have 5 Ivy League degrees. Here I'm getting one at Columbia. One of them is a PhD in physics. I worked on the XMM satellite, and so I have a view of science. I don't think anyone totally understands all the environmental science, but I think I understand it pretty well, but grounded in the earth. I left academia to start my first company. And here is my first mention in the Wall Street Journal almost 20 years ago. And many more. This company operated on 4 continents. We were valued in the tens of millions of dollars. We had our ups, we had our downs. That led me to business school after that, where I started learning about leadership. I wrote a book that became a #1 best-selling book, Leadership Step by Step. I've written another book since then. So I'm a best-selling author on leadership. I've taught at NYU. This is a review. I have scores of reviews that look just like this. And this is not to promote me, but you'll see later the relevance of reviews like, this is one of the greatest classes I've ever taken. It was engaging, thought-provoking, challenging, fun. Josh is an incredible teacher, mentor, and friend. If I could take this class all over again, I would. So that was me before anything about the environment. But I didn't really think much about sustainability. But in that context, the headlines increased. 1988, global warming was front page news on the New York Times. We haven't really acted on it. You know that you've seen thousands of headlines of it going more on and on and on. This was the context in which I would think there must be a solution to this. And if you asked me what were the solutions to our sustainability, our environmental problems, I would have said at the time, well, #1, vote. Next, we got to create new technologies. With more technologies, we can make things more efficient. And if it's more efficient, we can produce less waste. I hadn't yet known the system's perspective at that point. I certainly thought that nuclear fusion, if we could make power, energy, without coal, without greenhouse emissions, without creating radioactivity, I thought that would solve everything. I certainly thought if we could sequester carbon, if we could take carbon and other greenhouse gases and other pollution out of the atmosphere and put them in the ground somehow, that would work. But these things, fusion, sequestration, there's certain reasons, there's stories I can tell about them that say they're not so effective as people think. And I didn't want to tell every story, but ask me about those stories. But the big thing here is that they require there's such big solutions. They require government, they require corporations. So at a personal level, I would say, I certainly want to do something, but only governments, only corporations can really make a difference. So I can vote, maybe I can come up with some technology, some changes, but mostly it's out of my hands, and I hope they can handle it. But then I realized that however much it should be government and corporations changing things, that's what I thought, I could still take responsibility for my pollution. And so I gave myself a challenge. Could I go for a week without buying any packaged food? And I really thought this was going to be a miserable week because I live in New York, and my idea was the restaurants here are some of the best in the world. And I got so much variety in the packaged, pre-made food. I expected it would be a chore. It would be a burden. It would be misery. It would be futility. It would take me more time and cost me more money. So here I blogged about it, and I recommend you go to my blog and read my stories about avoiding packaged food. But the main result was that I found the opposite. Despite my expectations, that it would cost more, that it would be more convenient, that it would be more inaccessible to people who didn't live like me. Like, what about someone in a food desert? Actually, I found that a new system based on enjoying what I had. Ask me the story about all the middle steps, about learning to cook and learning to buy directly from my farmers, and how delicious the food has become and how more accessible it is. How people in food deserts invite me to show them how to do what I do because they see it's accessible. So I learned stewardship, resilience, and meaningful, purposeful action where I thought it would be impossible, where I thought it would be the opposite. And that led me to, more than the material change of learning to cook and changing my diet, I came to expect that acting on my environmental values would improve my life. That acting on any of my values of mine would improve my life. And so I acted more and more on these things. Something that I expected would never happen. And I found this message nowhere. I didn't know anyone. I couldn't find any place that was saying, I found many places that said, you have to act because you have to. It's an obligation. If you don't, we're all going to die. Something like that. And you must comply. This is what you have to do. Nothing about, you're going to like it more after you change. But that was my experience. Where was this message? There was no leadership. There's no inspiration. There's no Mandela of the environment. That's what I thought. And I thought, if no one's doing it, and this is important, I chose to take on this mantle, a very difficult choice. To say I'm going to become the Mandela of the environment is, who says, I felt like if I fail, people would be like, what were you thinking? Oh, you're going to be Mandela, a great historical figure like that, or Dr. King. And what if I succeeded? I would go up against some of the greatest forces around. I mean, think of the assets behind fossil fuels. So if I failed, I would fail. If I succeeded, I would get pummeled by, you see what happens to people who go up against Exxon and Koch brothers and things like that. But what began with anxiety and uncertainty, reluctance, once I began acting into what has evolved into this sustainable life, action led to determined, values-based, service-based leadership. You saw the list of people that I've worked with on my podcast. They become peers. They refer me to others for us to work together and to grow. And now we want to grow more. So it began with the podcast Leadership in the Environment. It was called Leadership in the Environment. Part of what we're looking for funding for is to rebrand, because we believe that this sustainable life will be more appealing. And the podcast led to these peers. Here's some of them. That led to more and more speaking. And that's led to a community growing. Besides the people who've been on the podcast, some very famous names here. But also this is the page for Leadership in the Environment Sweden. And it's growing into more and more leadership in the environments, and a team that's formed to grow leadership in the environment, the base one in the United States. In particular, after my third TEDx talk, many people came to me and said, Josh, this was at another level. What you do is necessary. It's effective. It's engaging. And no one else does it. You have to get this message out more. It's not getting out as much as it should. And they said, we will help. And that led to a team of 5 people, of experienced professionals, formed, and we said, what can we do together? And because one of them is huge in PR, one of them is huge in television production, and one of them is huge in leadership connections, we said, we should do a TV series. We developed a vision of what we are and what we aren't. And that's the history. We're reaching the limits of what a volunteer team can do, but we have a growing reputation, we have a solid foundation, we're seeing high demand, community is growing, we're becoming more and more effective, we're working together as a team more. And now the stage is to raise funds through tax-deductible donations to realize our vision. The future that we see is for U.S. global culture to shift from I have to steward to I get to steward. I love what I do, not because I have to. My taking over a year to fill up a load of garbage is not about avoiding things. It's about enjoying what I get. It's meeting my farmers. One of the highlights of my year is to go up to the farm and see the stuff that's growing, and to go to the farmer's market. I can get into all of that. But it's more community, more connection, more joy. Embracing stewardship, practicing stewardship, not from obligation, but with enthusiasm.